Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. My name is Yvonne Ezekiel. I am the managing partner of Olisa Agbakoba Legal, and I'm also the head of the corporate commercial practice, as well as the international trade and investment practice. So on behalf of the law firm of Olisa Agbakoba Legal, I'm so proud to welcome all of you here today to this webinar. The theme of our webinar is employment law and minimum wage, understanding the legal implications and ethical considerations for companies. Firstly, before proceeding with the main business of the day, I'd like to appreciate everyone for taking the time out to join us and participate in this webinar today. Please be rest assured that the session will be highly insightful and enriching. We also recognize the growing importance of employment law in guiding ethical and sustainable corporate practices. In particular, the topic of minimum wage has become a focal point as it touches upon our shared responsibilities to balance profitability with fairness and respect for our workforce. So the purpose of this webinar is to provide a comprehensive understanding of the current landscape of employment law and the minimum wage in Nigeria, and to explore the legal implications and ethical considerations for companies. Now, before we begin, here are a few technical notes that I'd like us to please be aware of. Please ensure your audio is on mute to avoid background noise. Use the chat box to ask questions or share comments. We have a team members who are around to make sure they're taking notes of any questions that you have, and at the end of the webinar, we'll post it to our esteemed panelists. Now, if you experience any technical issues, please refresh your browser and put any other comments in the chat box like I've said already. Now, thank you very much for all of that. Now, moving forward, I'd like to welcome our speakers who will take us through today's session. So I'm so proud to say that we have a panel of esteemed speakers and professionals who are very well known in their profession and are leaders in this field. So the first person I have is Dr. Temitope Richard Banji. Dr. Temitope Banji, I'll read his profile now for us. He's a seasoned global human capital and leadership consultant, boasting a wealth of experience exceeding over a decade. His professional journey has woven through the intricate tapestry of human capital, talent management, HR transformation, leadership development, and coaching, coupled with adeptness in culture and change management across the expansive landscape of UK, Europe, and the Middle East and Africa. Now, having left his indelible mark on esteemed organizations such as Accenture, with Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Digital UK, MasterCard Foundation, Africa and Canada, Deloitte West Africa, YIP Africa, Nigerian, and Access Bank, of course, Nigeria, and the domestic and General Insurance UK, Temitope has collaboratively reshaped organizational cultures and operational paradigms. He's been engaging with leadership at all levels and has spearheaded initiatives in redefining work dynamics, managing transformative change, and fortifying talent management strategies. His focus extends to illuminating the future of work, elucidating how the integration of technology into organizational practices can enhance the overall employee experience. Temitope's dynamic professional footprint spans diverse industries and sectors, including financial services, retail and fashion, local and international non-profit organizations, FMCGs, the public sector, international development, and media. On a personal note, Temitope finds joy in the spirited game of football, traversing the globe, and relishing quality time with his family. His commitment extends beyond professional realms as he dedicates time to mentor young Africans on their career journeys. His insights are encapsulated in his authored work, Work Readiness Made Easy, which is a guide to navigating the intricacies of career success. So as you can see, Temitope's profile shows you how esteemed and his professional knowledge and experience. Welcome, Dr. Temitope. Our next speaker is Mr. Adewale Smart Yerinde. Mr. Adewale Smart Yerinde is the Director General and Chief Executive of the Nigerian He has experience in investor relations, business development, stakeholder management, amongst others. He champions decent work, eradication of child labor, social justice, and inclusive development. He's a sustainable development goals advocate and a responsible business conduct champion. Mr. Adewale Smart serves on the governing board of the International Labour Organization, ILO. He also serves on the board of the National Pension Commission, PENCOM, and the Nigerian Social Insurance Trust Fund, NSITF, amongst others. He is the co-chairman of the NECA ITF Technical Skills Development Project, among many others. His passion for social justice led him to partake in initiatives promoting sustainable development goals, tripartism, and social dialogue. He's a PhD student in human resources at the University of Lagos, and he's also a UNIDO-trained ISO 9001-2015 auditor. His commitment to continuous learning is evident through his courses at prestigious institutions like the London Business School. He's an alumnus of the ITC ILO Training Center, having attended many training courses at the center. He's an author, a public speaker, policy advocate, and a youth advocate. His expertise in business membership organization management is recognized internationally. His dedication to promoting fair practices and inclusive growth sets a commendable example in the field. So I present to you, Mr. Adewale Smart Yerinde. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Our next esteemed speaker is Miss Joy Benson. Now she's a member of the SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resources Management. She's also a member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, Chartered Institute of Secretaries, and she's also a lawyer. Ms. Benson is a seasoned legal practitioner, like I mentioned, with over 17 years corporate law experience and a skilled human resources practitioner with over 12 years experience in recruitment, training, and people management across a global audience and multiple businesses. She has facilitated in several events on employment law in Nigeria and other HR-related topics. She's the managing partner of Upswing Corporate Services Limited, a HR and business advisory firm. In her role as the managing partner, she has collaborated with clients, which includes multinational organizations within continents, to develop HR strategies that is woven into the organizational and functional strategies of their businesses. She's a senior certified professional of the prestigious Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, and as associate member of the reputable Chartered Institute of Personnel Management Nigeria and the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, both of UK and Nigeria. Joy says, people ask, Joy, why do you do what you do? And her answer is very simple, that she loves to change lives. She says, I'm a bloodhound for talent, I'm people focused, and I'm business driven. So thank you very much, Joy, for joining us. And last but not least is Mr. Benson Upa. He's just joined us. Mr. Benson Upa is the head of information and public affairs at the Nigerian Labour Congress. He's also a leadership, public affairs, and security analyst. Mr. Benson, thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, Mr. Benson, we're trying to sort out your audio issues. I'm sure by the time I come around to you with my questioning, we probably would have sorted that out. So now that I've introduced my esteemed panelists and guests, and I'm sure from their profiles, you will agree with me that they are the most suitable people who I could have gotten to be part of this webinar. So thank you very much, all of you. Right. So like I said, the topic of minimum wage is a very hot topic in Nigeria right now. It's so topical, especially considering the economic situation that we are in at the moment. Of course, the minimum wage law enjoins employers to at least pay the minimum wage by the Minimum Wage Act. So my first question will go to Dr. Temitope. Having set that tone and said that the Minimum Wage Act requires that all employers should at least strive to pay the minimum wage. So my question is, how can organizations, especially, for example, the small and medium scale enterprises, MSEs, how can they effectively balance their business interests and financial sustainability with the social responsibility to pay a fair and competitive wage to workers?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on the call, depending on where you're joining from. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I think the topic is something that is trending at the moment in Nigeria. As I think early this year, we've had a series of, back and forth between the government and the Nigerian Labour Congress on issues around Labour Congress, labor minimum wage. I think one of the things that has been missing in this conversation has also been the education of small and medium enterprises on the concept of fair wages, right? I think that's something that has been really missing, especially in a country like Nigeria. Fair wages is just really ensuring that organizations start to consider having some sort of balance between the kind of work that people are doing and the kind of pay that they are paying their employees, to ensure that there's that fairness, that equity in terms of the wage. It's really important for SMEs to understand this, because it will help over time to reduce issues around labor turnover. Right. We have a lot of turnover. And if we do research from my engagement with younger people, with a lot of organizational leaders, they're struggling with, very high turnover. And this high turnover is also as a result of absence of fair wages. People don't feel they're adequately compensated. So I think there's that place of education and advocacy to SMEs in understand the concept of fair wages. There's also a twist to it, because the question will now be, can they actually afford it, right? And that's where we now need to have the government putting structures in place to ensure adherence, which I think we'll probably get to later in this conversation. Also, it would be good to encourage SMEs to leverage government grants or support programs to help offset wage expenses. I know LSETF, they have programs for SMEs that can help them. The government has a lot of programs that is actually geared towards supporting SMEs to strengthen them, strengthen their financials and all of that. But how many of these SMEs actually take time to understand and even learn, educate themselves about these opportunities? I would also say it's important for SMEs in their budgeting, right, to build wages into budgeting and their financial forecast. This will really help them maintain and become more predictable when it comes to wage compliance during the policies that are geared towards protecting the interest of employees. Because most times we have employers who put out a role, people work from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. and you hear things like drivers are being paid 30K, right? At the end of the day, is it really worth it? We are not encouraging bad behavior, but when someone is working 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and is being paid 30,000 a month, right, there are loads of issues that would come up from there. So I think I would say it's important to understand the concept of fair wage, right? Looking into their books. Further questions can come up from there.
Right. Okay. The internet's a bit moment, but I don't know if we missed out certain part of what Dr. Temitope said, but we'll come back to that. And I just want to pick up a number of things that you mentioned. One is education of SMEs, for them to understand what a fair wage means, to ensure that they can minimize labor turnover, and also leverage on government programs that are directed towards supporting SMEs. And the bigger question is, can they afford it?
Yeah.
Now, I would like to then not speak to Mr. Wale Smartirende, who's the Director General of Nigeria Employers Consultative Association. So, Dr. Wale, you represent the employers. I suppose it includes the SMEs as well, not just more employers. So, based on one of the things that Dr. Temitope has said, in your opinion, how can organizations ensure sustainable pay for workers? Because the question of affordability is real. So how can organizations ensure equitable pay for their workers in different regions of Nigeria, given that the cost of living varies significantly across state lines and areas, and what ethical framework can be adopted to address potential wage disputes in this context?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I think I will start from the perspective where Dr. Tope started from. The concept of fair wage, living wage, sustainable wage, um, minimum wage. I think to a large extent, there are concepts that you can hardly put a finger on a definition of it. You can only build consensus around those concepts. Because if you ask an employer, what is fair wage? The employer's concept of fair wage will be different from the worker's concept of fair wage. And if every stakeholder in the labor and employment ecosystem will probably give his own definition based on where his interest is coming from. So while those concepts are very necessary, they're desirable, except we build consensus on those definitions, the way we have built on minimum wage at the global level, then we'll still have contextual or definitional controversy about this is sustainable, this is okay, this is not okay. The interest of the employer and the workers will consistently be at variance. The percentage of variance might differ, but there always be variance until we really address the fundamental, which is the economic issues. So if the economy is in a good state, then what a sustainable wage will be different from when the economy is going south. We've negotiated 30,000 now to 70,000. If the economy is in the right path, it's growing sustainably, you realize that what 30,000 can probably buy will be more than what 7,000 will get you at a different season. So why focus on 70,000 while I can actually put more pressure on government to make my 30,000 worth much more than 70,000. But that's per way. But coming back to your question, I think for SMEs, and it's also part of the contradictions. Sorry, I'm raising these contradictions first.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
fine.
check the national policy on SME, It defines SMEs differently. If you check the CBN definition of SME, it also defines SME differently. Why one SME is from 9 employees, even businesses having from 9 to 50 employees, divided by SME. Another definition, national definition, gives employers employing between 10 to 99. So it also creates its contradiction within the context of the law, because the law currently defines SME as businesses employing less than 25. Those are the ones that actually have exceptions, which also creates another dynamics for us. So if I will directly address your question, equitable pay will never be equal, and that's the reality of it. Because except you agree on a parameter that cuts across industries. We have food and beverage industry. We have over 40 different sectors, industrial sectors, and the performance of each sector differs. So we cannot have a blanket parameter to use to gauge every sector. Look at the banks. So while the manufacturing sector, the service sector, most of them are declaring losses. They are struggling to stay afloat. Banks are declaring
massive profits.
Humongous profits. So we cannot actually say, okay, the banks and those other sectors should pay within the context of equitable pay. What we can do and what we have canvassed is let each sector with integrity look at what exactly is our current state. What exactly can we pay within the context of this sector? And that is currently happening across all industrial sectors. Because before the national minimum wage conversation, we reached out to all the sectoral groups. We collected their current minimum wage. And most of those sectors are actually paying far above 70,000, even while the minimum wage was 30,000. Averagely, most of them are paying 100,000 negotiated minimum wage at the sectoral level. Because collective bargaining goes on at those different sectors. Some do collective bargaining every year, some do collective bargaining every 2 years, some every 3 years, where wages are renegotiated and their own minimum wage renegotiated. So progressively, minimum wage continued to change in those sectors in an annual basis, based on their performance, the sectoral performance, and their ability to pay. So it will be difficult for us to have to canvas the context of for most of those sectors. Now, going to the regions, it also surprised you because it's a bit also controversial, even among the unions, because with some experts have also canvassed that, look, why not let's use the cost of living index? Somebody in Lagos doesn't have to necessarily earn somebody that is in Kano, or somebody that is in Jigawa or Adamawa, because the cost of living in Lagos, in Abuja, in Port Harcourt, those are basically the hotbeds of all these issues. The cost of living in those places is higher than most places. So why can't Lagos have its own context of negotiation? Then those other states have their own context. But the unions vehemently, the NLCTC vehemently canvassed against it, that look, they want a uniform pay across board, and that is how that conversation has stalled. But progressively, as we move to maybe the next 3 years, when the new minimum wage, a new one will be negotiated. I think the conversation will be, let each region or each state or each cluster, no matter how we want to cluster them, let us negotiate based on cost of living of those particular areas. It helps everybody. It helps the employers. It helps the workers, and it also makes the economy much more competitive.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sadewale. You made some very interesting points. First of all, you talked about the concept of fair wage or living wage or minimum wage, and the lack of uniform understanding of this concept across board. what an employer considers to be fair may not be fair, necessarily fair to the employee. And you've also talked about the fact that, I like this point that you made, that in defining minimum wage, perhaps, it should be left to the various sectors based on the various nuances and indices that they face. That should be the basis for negotiating minimum wage, and perhaps maybe using the cost of living index across the various parts of Nigeria. So I would ask Ms. Joy this question, following up on that in your opinion, what areas did the Act fail to adequately address? I mean, he's made some points. I don't know if these are some of the points that are missing in the Act, but what, in your opinion, do you think are areas if the Act failed to adequately address? And how do you think that these shortcomings could be remedied? If there's any recommendations that you can make to ensure that this Minimum Wage Act is effective and fair?
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to my esteemed co-panelists. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for the opportunity of being a part of today's program. So I'm going to just quickly, just a second, please. All right. So before we go in, I believe this is a mixed class, and I don't know if we have some people who are not quite abreast with how we got to this point of conversation. So I'll just do a little history on how we got here and why we are discussing this now, for anyone who might be feeling that they're not quite sure what we're discussing about. So we all know about, I'm sure the Minimum Wage Act was something that has been in the news for a very long time. And in January of 2024, a tripartite committee was established by the president to set up a new minimum wage for the country, because the previous minimum wage of about 30,000 naira was to expire by April 2024. Now, some people might be asking that, Joe, what are you talking about? Okay, let me give some bit of a background. Now, the Minimum Wage Act 2019 does say that there's a review period of the minimum wage every 5 years. So the 5 years that for the 30,000 naira previous minimum wage was going to expire in April of this year. And then, of course, the unions came up citing Section 16 of the Constitution, and initially proposed 615,000 naira as the new minimum wage with the government. Now, I'm not going to take you through all the drama that happened in between, but we all know that there was a lot of back and forth between the government and the trade unions, and the Nigerian Labour Congress and TUC decided to go on an indefinite strike on the 31st of May. Now, of course, in all of these plenty discussions, we had the private sector also making their own proposals. I think there was a time they proposed about 47,000, 60,000, different proposals, really. Like I said, I won't take you through all of that. So the strike action, of course, as you know, commenced on Monday, 3rd of June. And it, of course, shut down the economy. All of us were affected by it. So I believe even if you were not following the news, you felt the effects of that strike for that period. So anyway, by July 18th, the president, our current president, President Tinubu, had a meeting with the unions, and they finally accepted at 70,000 naira, which is the current minimum wage that the unions accepted, with mixed feelings. I would dare say mixed feelings, So the minimum wage was assented to and signed by July 29th of 2024. So I've given you a brief run-up of the events leading to this discussion, because it's important that you have that at the back of your mind for those who are not abreast with where we are at now. So the new minimum wage 2024, as amended, addressed two areas, amended only two parts of the 2019, which was the new minimum wage was reviewed to 70,000 naira, and the review period of 5 years was reduced to 3 years. So meaning that this current 70,000 naira minimum wage will be up for review in 2024 by 2027. So, and the 70,000 naira minimum wage was over 100% increase from the previous minimum wage. Now, I want to say now, as regards the shortcomings, addressing the question now, there's something, Mr. Benson, we have the same surname, amazing. Okay, so there's a very good salient point raised, which was the fact that minimum wage should have been addressed based on sector. I do 100% agree with that, because I mean, minimum wage for the public sector, the bank, so cannot be the same with some other sectors. So, but I would add, in addition to what you have said, I would also say that the exemptions that was given, which is found in Section 4 of the Minimum Wage Act amended 2024, that applies, that says that the minimum wage will not apply to companies with less than 25 employees. I kind of disagree with that, because in my opinion, we have companies with less than 25 employees that can adequately pay for minimum wage. I feel, and I'm proposing that the minimum wage ought to have been set as regards the company's annual turnover. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm looking at my screen. I should be looking at the camera. So, so please, just in case my eyes goes, please just bear with me. All right. So it should be reviewed according to the annual turnover, like we have in the Company Income Tax Act, because I feel that is a fairer representation of the economy we're currently in. That people that have 10 employees that are high, that have high turnover, 15. And so those people now are you trying to say now that they are out of, they are not subject to the act, which I will feel, in my opinion, is does not do justice to the intention of the act. There was an intention of the legislature when they were conceiving and when they were drafting that act, when they brought that act together. I remember that for those of who are lawyers, during our legal drafting, they taught us about how laws, what was the intention of the law, what was it meant to address. We're looking at the spirit of the law. And I believe that the spirit of the law was talking about, giving consensus to companies in the sense that did not have a high turnover. So I think that the wording should not say less than 25 employees. It should talk about the turnover of the company at that particular time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Joy. Thank you for that. We're right on time. I was just about to say we've got 1 minute left and round it up. But I'm sure we'll come back to some of the interesting points that you raised. You agreed that, and I one of the panelists has mentioned that the minimum wage ideally what should be considered is the turnover of a company, looking at each sector and the sectorial newest industry, and decide, and from that, the decision to raise the minimum wage should be based on that, or to determine what minimum wage should be based on those indices. I would like to speak now to Mr. Benson from the Nigerian Labour Congress. You guys have been instrumental to the negotiation of this minimum wage. So my first question to you is that, given the economic hardships Nigerians are facing, do you believe that paying a minimum wage is feasible for most organizations? I mean, we do know, yes, some can afford it, but a lot of people are also struggling as well. So is minimum wage a fair concept that must it meet workers' needs? Or should there be some adjustments that need to be considered in determining a minimum wage? Mr. Benson, can you unmute yourself, please? Mr. Benson, can you hear me? Excuse me, can you hear me? All right, I'll probably come back to him so that, we just keep it going. Right. So like I said,
while we're waiting for Mr. Benson, do you mind if you just chip in something?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much to Ms. Joy and Mr. Wale. I think just for clarity's sake, one of the things that is very important, which I think Ms. Joy talked about it, is the fact that equity pay is not necessarily saying everyone must earn same thing per level, right?
Exactly.
So it is very, very important to consider the location, the sector. For example, the education sector, you would hardly find a class teacher earning up to 300,000, both private or public. It's really, it's, you know, the whole concept of equity pay is equitable pay is ensuring there's a fair balance and a strike, you know, across. And this is also location-wise. And if we look internationally and bring it back locally, people in London, for example, will earn about 5 to 8% more than people in Manchester, which is also based on the economic factors, living and all of that. So these are also factors that put in place. And the big question that I also have, you know, when Mr. Wale talked about having a consensus, right? Who is responsible for driving this consensus? And I think that is where the government really needs to come in. That is where the NLC really needs to come in and ensure that we protect employees and at the same time protect employers. So I just thought to chip in that as we go on with the conversation as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And Mr. Benson, I think he's ready to join us now. Mr. Benson, can you hear me? Mr. Benson. Please, can you respond if you can hear me?
The whole concept of equity pay is...
All right. Okay. We'll come back to him again. All right. So I'll thanks for that contribution to Temitope. So one of the things I'd like to ask you is, I mean, knowing how technology is very important to businesses these days, right? So the question is, how can organizations leverage technology to ensure that in human resources management, we can streamline compliance with minimum wage and labor laws? So how can we, you know, leverage technology using maybe a HR software to ensure that, you know, employers are complying with minimum wage and labor laws?
All right, thank you very much. I think I have a very weird answer to that question, right? I have a very weird answer because I personally do not think technology really has a role to play at the moment.
That's fine. Yeah.
The minimum wage has to be first agreed on, like the consensus that was talked about, because technology is really what you put into it that it just brings out, right? So if the minimum wage is not agreed on, there's no policy that is backing it up, you know, technology will still just do what it wants to do. But typically, yes, we encourage, you know, organizations to, for the purpose of record keeping, right? Technology is a very useful tool in helping manage their payroll. They're able to keep the records. They are able to, you know, automate their payments and all of that, right? But there's really, the payment that would go out is also a factor of what has been put in. If the consensus has happened sectorally, regionally, and, you know, the minimum wage is effective, then they impute it into the system, and that's what then goes out. There's also, again, I would always go back to the concept of affordability, right? Like Mr. Wale said, we are still struggling with our understanding of SMEs in Nigeria. You know, there's so many definitions of what SME could mean. You know, 0 to 10, you hear 10 to 25. Even some organizations will tell you a Dangote sugar is still an SME, right? That has, I mean, these are conversations that we've been having. So that concept of SME, we're still struggling with separating what SME is and MSME, which is the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So again, maybe because I'm quite academic driven and because I'm a consultant, I would always go back to, there is need for education. There is need for serious education in Nigeria. We need to educate ourselves, re-educate ourselves. There are policies, there are acts, there are laws that a lot of businesses are not even aware of. A lot of employees are not even aware of. So I would always fall back to the place of education. But yes, to answer directly, technology is very, very important in the world of today. It would help, ensure adherence if the policies and the consensus and the proper definition of minimum wage is agreed on. Then technology is an enabler to ensure that that is adequately done and effectively done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know I mean, it seems like I digressed a little bit by going into technology, but I was getting somewhere with that, which is around compliance and keeping proper records to ensure that, things are done properly. But I'd like to get back to Mr. Benson. I don't know if Mr. Benson is sorted now with his technical issues around audio. Mr. Benson, we really would like to get your thoughts around some of the things we're discussing here. So can you respond if you can hear me? Mr. Benson, can you hear? It's Congress. So, and you all know that the NLC they have been key and instrumental to the discussions around the minimum wage. So it is really beneficial for us to hear some of his perspectives around the minimum wage and compliance with that, or non-compliance thereof. Mr. Benson? All right. So while I still wait for Mr. Benson to get sorted in terms of his audio, I would like to come back to Mr. Wale. Mr. Wale, like I said, I asked Dr. Temitope things around compliance with the minimum wage. And so I want to come back to you in terms of, to Mr. Wale. I want to come back to you around still on compliance, because we know historically, we know that, some people would comply, some people would not. So what measures, in spite of what your thoughts are around how minimum wage should be defined and who should qualify and so on and so forth, I would like to get your thoughts around, as an employer consultative forum member, how would you address the challenges with non-compliance, and what do you think the government should do to help implement effectively and the minimum wage law, and also be able to monitor the enforcement of the minimum wage?
Thank you. I remember during the committee meeting, I was privileged to lead the employers team. And part of the issues we raised is this. It's one thing to come up with a law. It's one thing to enforce it.
Yeah.
If you can't enforce, or if circumstances, as lawyer we say, circumstances ab initio will hinder the compliance, then what you have done successfully is to create challenges for the courts, the National Industrial Court, because everybody will move to the courts.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario. Then we will overwhelm the courts, because the court that is not probably well staffed or already will be overwhelmed with cases that we probably will not resolve until we start the next conversation in 3 years' time. So I think those are critical issues that we raised, and compliance will continue to be an issue. If you want to comply, if there are no compliance, if there are gaps in compliance, then enforcement must play a role. Now, if the people that are also meant to enforce, the Ministry of Labor and Employment, if they're also not well equipped, either not well staffed, or they're not probed enough to enforce, so realize you've created a law that opens a lot of flanks that unscrupulous employers can leverage on, because they know that, look, there won't be any compliance. Now, if I don't comply, then I won't enforce. So those are the critical issues. But Dr. mentioned the issue of technology. I think one of the ways that we can ensure compliance. Pardon me, I'm a big, maybe because of what I do, I'm a big promoter of consensus building. You can't really enforce compliance in anything. If you build consensus around compliance, I think it helps you more. So the first thing we can do is to build consensus around compliance. The employers are willing to comply, but to comply and comply fully, government must play its role in making the business environment more hospitable for them to operate in. It is when a business is standing on one leg, and it's also facing serious regulatory and legislative challenges. Everybody is breathing on the business. Then, and when I want to stay in business, you start thinking of how exactly. So on the conversation about the economy, we must fast track the whatever reforms where the implementation of the reforms, this economy must get back to the growth trajectory. That is the fundamental on which everything lies. The second thing I think we should do, one of the measures we should do, is for employers, and we've started this conversation, on beyond the current exceptions that we have, the minister still has the prerogative to give more exceptions as it deems necessary based on national economy, national interest. That is encapsulated in the law. But beyond the current exceptions, if a sector faces the critical risk of survival, then you need to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea. Do I pay 70,000 or do I pay the minimum wage and downsize? Or do I maintain status quo pending when I'm in a position to pay? Those are tough conversations that the business owner, the employees, we have to have. Now, look, this is the situation on ground. We want to pay this, we want to comply, but circumstances beyond our control cannot make us to comply. Compliance will mean downsizing. If they have those conversations holistically, honestly, in good faith, then you realize, look, we can find a way around this conversation around somebody paying or somebody not paying. And the minister also playing his role of looking at those issues holistically, compassionately, and also step down some of those, or increase some of those parameters of the exceptions for an employer. But good faith must play a major part. The Ministry of Labour must be equipped and re-equipped, and borrowing Topper's word, must continuously be educated. Because it's one thing for the teacher, for the students, to know more than the teacher. It creates problem. It creates serious problem. So the ministry must continually be educated in the context of this conversation so that they can play their role and play it effectively.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Wale. Mr. Benson, can you hear me now? Because I can see you're back on. You have to unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself. I can see you and I can see your mouth moving, but I hear nothing from. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Good. Yes, we can see you now, and I think I can hear you. Although you seem frozen. Mr. Benson? Mr. Benson, can you hear me, please? Mr. Benson? He seems frozen. All right, Mr. Ben. Okay, but you need to unmute yourself because I think you're on mute. Unmute yourself so that we can hear you. I still can't hear you. I don't know if anybody else in the panel can hear him. Mr. Benson.
It's frozen from my end. There's no movement. Frozen.
Yeah, no, he's gone off. Mr. Benson, he's still logged in, but I think he's... Yes, please unmute yourself. I'll not unmute him. Please unmute him. Can you hear me now? It would have been really great to hear the perspective of Nigerian Labour Congress and these conversations that we're having. Okay, so while we're still trying to, I'm sure before we end this entire session, at some point we should be able to get him back on so we can really get to hear his perspective. But,
okay, let me go. Let me leave and come back. Let me leave and come back.
No, just stay on so we can hear you speak now. We don't need to, it's okay if we can hear you. We'll probably need to hear you more than we actually need to see your face. So I can hear you, and I think that's fine. So if you can hear my question, just tell me yes, if you can hear what I'm saying. Seems to have gone off. Okay. Right. Okay. Some interesting points made by Mr. Oyemide, which is the fact that the question around if a fair pay by employers, especially if employers in various sectors are facing different issues. We know that some industries are more profitable than others, and depending on how that industry operates, would also depend on how their ability, their affordability, the ability to pay the minimum wage. So the question is, should I pay minimum wage or should I downsize? Which is better? That's a good question to ask. In trying to enforce compliance of minimum wage by looking at the various indices around industries, not be able to determine that some people should not be penalized for not being able to pay the minimum wage. So that will bring me to the question I want to ask Dr. Timitope, which is around, do you think that organizations should implement a whistleblowing policy as best practice for reporting on ethical labor practices, which will include the non-payment of a minimum wage?
Yeah, thank you.
I am back.
Yeah, I'll come back to you after Dr. Timitope answers this question. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for that question, and I think it's also a very nuanced question, right? Because I think there's something that we still have that is pending to be addressed, which is the issue around the definition of this minimum wage, equitable wage, and all of that. So I think while that is still pending to be addressed, I think it is very, very important. So once we've agreed on issues around clarity and consensus in terms of what the minimum wage should be, what equitable wage would look like industry-wise, a school is not going to pay same thing as a bank. A bank might not pay like the oil and gas, right?
Absolutely.
A local NGO would not pay what international NGOs are paying. And all of these are causing, a lot of disparity in the so-called wage in Nigeria. In terms of whistleblowing policy, I think that would be an absolutely great idea, because we have, again, that would help with compliance and adherence to the policy of around minimum wage. If employees have a platform where they can actually escalate the fact that, Nigerian government has said 70,000 is the minimum wage, and I'm here, an employer in XYZ organization, industry, sector, whatever, they are still paying me 30,000 naira, right? A whistleblowing policy will be very good, and systems and structures in place will be very good to ensure that, employees can speak up, they can escalate how they are being treated by their employers. And I think the labor laws in Nigeria have really, really protected employees to a great extent, because from a consulting point of view, a lot of the employer-employee cases that have gone legal, to a great extent, you find, that the employees are favored, because a lot of times the employers are not complying with the set down regulations. So yes, I would 100% be in support of whistleblowing policy, where employees can actually speak up and report their employers in terms of how they are being treated from a equitable pay or minimum wage and compliance point of view. So yes, I would absolutely agree with that. And there's also something around government saying, okay, we have a whistleblowing policy to encourage psychological safety of employees, but how do we also ensure there is no retaliation? Because those are two things that go hand in hand. While we are building psychological safety, we should ensure that we're also putting systems in place to ensure there's no retaliation. Because if the employer finds out, this was the person that escalated us, how is that person going to be treated afterwards? You know, are they going to start maltreating the person? So all of that needs to go hand in hand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Benson, can you hear me now, please?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, fantastic. Right, we've been, I'm sad that you just joined us now, but I'm hoping that maybe you heard us, even if we couldn't hear you. We've had some very interesting contributions from our fellow panelists. A number of things have been said. You know, there's a question around the definition of what an SME is. Okay, there's very definition of that. There's also the fact that we need to build consensus around compliance, right? And there's been talk around the fact that government needs to create the right enabling environment for employers in order for them to be profitable and able to afford the minimum wage. Now, the key thing here around the definition of what an SME is. Now, if an employer obviously has less than 25, then you say he's exempt from paying the minimum wage. But we know that perhaps if he's in a profitable business like the oil and gas, then he should be able to pay the minimum wage. So the question is, given the current economic hardship, and let me go back to something that Dr. Temitope said. Various sectors have various degree of affordability, okay? So we talk about the teaching profession versus the bank versus the oil and gas. Clearly, you know, different sectors with their affordability criteria. Now, so given economic hardships, do you think that paying the minimum wage is feasible for all organizations in Nigeria? And in your opinion, is the current minimum wage fair enough to meet workers' needs? Should there be some adjustments to be considered? Did you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go on, sir.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just towards the end, I lost it, but let me speak to this matter quickly. The concept of a national minimum wage, the logic of it is that it is the barest minimum below which no entity is allowed to pay, and is set a threshold. Like if you employ less than 25%, you are excluded. You know, all those terms and conditions are clearly stated here. But for entities that are captured in the law, it is important that they pay. Because all considerations were taken at the point of a negotiation. But beside that, representation was broad-based, even for the organized private sector. We have about 4 or 5 groups from the organized private sector, including NECA, whose DG is here, my good friend, Dr. Smart Oyerinde. We have Manufacturers Association. We have other entities all down the line. So it is imperative, it is a law that must be obeyed, because obedience to this law creates a positive effect. It creates a synergy for all. It creates capacity. It creates a cyclical capacity. Okay? As for what other minimum wages may be, this should not be an issue. What an organization A can afford, it should pay, but it should not be lower than the national minimum wage. For instance, as the previous speaker said, what the entities in the oil and gas may pay, the teachers' organization may not be able to pay. But so long as what they pay is not lower than the national benchmark, that is the direction. And let me at this point in time explain that the idea is to protect the vulnerable poor. Because if you leave them on their own, they are unable to protect themselves. And in the final analysis, I mean, the poverty that will be created will be an infectious one. It will end up consuming even those who are making them poor. Because you don't use poverty to cure poverty. You use wealth or prosperity to cure poverty. And it is in the interest of these organizations or companies that these people have enhanced capacity. So for me, all entities that are captured in the law have the wherewithal to pay. They can pay.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much. You've mentioned a number of things, which is, I mean, it's a law that must be obeyed.
The next question.
I'll come back to you in a minute, Mr. Benson. I just want to recap a few points that you made, which is that you said the minimum wage law is a law that must be obeyed. And you said it, it's there to create, and it creates a number of things, which is prosperity for the nation, and it's directed towards the people you consider to be at the bottom of the ladder, perhaps those who are unable to have people who can advocate for them or advocate for themselves. So it's to protect this group of people, particularly. So I want to come to Ms. Joy Benson, because we're talking about exemptions. The law exempts a certain group, or that it classifies as SMEs under 25 employees and below. Now, I want to ask you, do you think that this exemption is fair? Because you can have a very profitable organization that is not that should not qualify to be called as an SME, or at least should not be qualified to be exempted from paying this minimum wage. So do you think this exemption is fair? Yeah. And what do you think are the key, what do you think are the key legal considerations for this exemption?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think I should read that exemption section directly from the Act. Section 4 of the Act. Let me read it. Now, Section 4 of the Act says, Section 4, subsection 1 says, Section 3, which is the minimum wage now, does not apply to A, an establishment in which workers are employed or paid on part-time basis, commission or piece rates. B, an establishment employing less than 25 persons. C, workers in seasonal employment like agriculture. And D, any person employed in a vessel or aircraft to which the laws regulating merchant shipping or civil aviation apply. So 4 exemptions. Like I mentioned earlier, and which you just reiterated now, that I do not think that this exemption especially for the B part, an establishment employing less than 25 persons, is fair, because it's not a fair representation of the economy. I did mention that we have organizations that can pay the minimum wage that are less than 25 persons. So we are giving that's a lacuna for me in the minimum wage, because you are not giving these people, these businesses, a loop to say that, okay, even if I can afford to pay my staff 250,000, but the law says minimum wage is 70,000, I have just 15 staff members on my employee. So I can project and say that I will pay 70,000, or I can pay 80,000, when I can actually increase their living standard to about 200 or 250,000 in payments. So that is why I'm advocating that the minimum wage, the exemption should have been on the annual turnover of the company or the enterprise or the institution or whatever it is. Annual turnover should have been a basis for determining exception to the minimum wage.
Minimum wage.
Yes. Then I also want to mention also that what is piece rate? Now, piece rate, according to Section 17, means that it's any type of employment where a worker is paid according to quantity produced regardless of time. We have that mostly in the manufacturing, people that work in factories. So this is what we're saying, that any establishment that have workers that are paid on a part-time basis, commission, that means if you produce 20, let's say in a weave-on making company, If you produce like 100 packs of weave-ons a day, maybe that is your goal per day, we pay you per weave-on. So meaning that if a weave-on costs, for example, I'm paying 1,000 per weave-on. So meaning that if you produce 50 weave-ons, what you're entitled to is 50,000, or if it's 500, I know they don't pay as much. But my point is that such people are exempted. I'm giving an example for such exemptions. Then people that work in seasonal employment like agriculture, that means harvest period where you get laborers, harvest the seeds. Yes, I know. So I would say that the lacuna caused by the exemption, especially B, I will not consider that to be fair. I will not consider that to be equitable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me come back to Mr. Benson. So Ms. Joy Benson raised some interesting points around the fact that the annual turnover should really be the factor used to determine, who should be able to pay the minimum wage. So she's pointed out some concerns with the Act itself, with the law itself, which has created certain criteria of people who should be exempt, or certain factors that should be used to create exemptions, such as people who are seasonal workers or people who work on a commission basis. And then, of course, the one about the organization who has, with less than 25 employees and so on and so forth. So now looking at it from the ethical perspective, given that the Nigerian minimum wage was raised from 30K to 70K, okay? How can the organization ethically justify workers below who fall within this group of seasonal workers, commission, work on a commission basis, this group of people? How can we ensure that, they do not, that this law still applies to them, and that, employers would treat them ethically, at least have ethical labor practices in ensuring that, they're able to pay them fairly?
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Benson, whom I will now call my daughter, raised a fundamental questions here, which she called lacuna. I am impressed by the depths of her thoughts.
Yeah.
At the depth of her thoughts.
Yeah.
However, no law is perfect. These are areas, maybe in the course of another amendment in the next 2.5 years. Well, we're going to take a look at them, at these areas, and cause an amendment to be done, hopefully. It is also important to point out that the issue of ethics here, the ethical behavior of the companies in this band is key.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear, it is up to them to appreciate the fact that these workers are the geese that lay the golden eggs. If they are made miserably poor, they could fizzle away. They could just die slowly. But beyond that, I think there are other segments of labor law that deal with overexposure to hazards. And they could take care of areas like safety and health, unnecessary working long hours at work, and all of this. Those segments of labor law captured in the Factory Act, whatever, etc. They may be able to take care of some of these fallings. But at the moment, the intention of this law is not to make it inogatory. This law is made and intended to be enforceable and to be enforced.
Yeah.
If you include everybody at once, yeah, the domain may be too wide, too large.
Hello, Mr. Benson.
And besides, in Germany,
Hello, Mr. Benson.
as I said, in Germany, we do not have a national minimum wage law. But the German economy, until the Ukrainian war, was easily the biggest in Europe, and workers there very well paid. So the law actually, in general terms, every good law is intended to be a guide, a good guide, which those that are involved or captured in the law are expected to take a
Listen. Looks like we're having challenges with Mr. Benson's devices. We might have to take on another question and perhaps come back to him again when it's all sorted. But just to recount some of the things he has mentioned, he has said the law is made to be enforceable, you know. So he's unequivocal about that. It's made to be enforceable. So I will come to Mr. Wale Smartyeri because you had mentioned certain things. Are we going to overwhelm? We know that the National Industrial Court is a court saddled with responsibility to deal with employer-employee issues, which would include, you know, issues around pay and compensation. And we talked about the fact that we want to overwhelm the courts with matters like that in the case of where there is non-compliance. So my question to you as the Director General of the Nigeria Employer Consultative Association, I would like to know if the association has any punitive ability or any punitive actions that it takes if an employer is reported to the association for non-compliance with different matters, which would also include non-payment of wages. You know, so are there any possible? Do you have any sort of consequence management system to deal with non-compliance issues by employers, including non-payment of non-equal wage?
Well, for us, in the ecosystem, we are guided by the law. So while we don't have punitive powers, but we have coercive powers. You know, we can leverage the responsible agencies like the Ministry of
Do you mind
Labor.
just raising your voice up a little bit, Mr.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we
Yeah,
can
thank you.
leverage the provisions of the law to report employers that have become recalcitrant in the context of breaking the law. One of the things we preach is responsible enterprises, responsible business conduct.
Yeah.
And it behoves on all employers to abide by the law, provided the same law doesn't create bottlenecks for it to arrive at those to fulfill those obligations. Now, I want to beg to disagree on Mr. Benson's position as per those exceptions, because they are really not like they are not legalistic in nature. And for us, our strong position is, except you run a business, if you run a manufacturing business, you are in the thick of manufacturing, then all of us will probably not understand what an average business goes through in the context of either managing its turnover or what it takes to even turn anything over. in this economy. When we say business pays over 60 different taxes, levies, and fees at the 3 different levels, people think it's just a figure. Sometimes we think it's just statistics. It's not. An average business pays as much. An average business also faces the risk, the regulatory risk, the challenges, contradictions in the regulatory environment. You deal with NAFDAC. NAFDAC gives you its regulation. You fulfill those obligations. FCCPC come and say those regulations by NAFDAC, they are not bound by it, notwithstanding the certifications you get from NAFDAC. You still have to, they're not recognizing those. So you are basically in the middle of operating in this difficult environment. Then you deal with the issue of interest rates. People talk of inflation rates in the context of how it affects individuals and their household and the employee. But people forget that business suffers the consequence of interest rates. I might borrow from the bank at 10%. And in a year's time, the interest rate moves to 30%. Who suffers that?
Yeah.
Where will I put that as a borrower? And interest rate doesn't go, it doesn't go on strike, or it's not suspended by the banks. So we have to look at all these issues holistically before we can come up with a position that actually represents what exactly the economy is looking like. Is looking like. So those 25. But this conversation also came up in the context of the community level when we are discussing the minimum wage issue of, and we can pick those businesses, we can count them in those sectors, we can count them in our fingers. Apart from the fintechs, that probably we have 5 employees and be raking in millions and billions of dollars. Which other sector? Which other sector have that kind of peculiarity? Only the fintechs. The fintechs are the only one that we can point to say, look, they can manage less than even 10 employees and generate that kind of revenue that we are seeing currently. Take out fintech, which other industry? Whether it's manufacturing, because manufacturing is probably the biggest now. Which other sector has that kind of privilege of massing, or which other sector can hide under the regulatory framework? Nobody can no other business can hide under the radar apart from the fintech. So, and an average manufacturer, take a baker, somebody running a bakery, somebody running a pure water business. If you put him under the pressure of, say, he's not exempted, then how do you exactly now grow the economy? Because if you don't protect those businesses to move from MSMEs to probably SMEs and from SMEs to something bigger, then how exactly are you going to are you going to grow the economy? And there's a general consensus, as we saw a research yesterday by Joberman, that over 76% of employees are employed in the informal sector or the quasi-formal sector, which basically are the MSME and the SME. So the whole concept is protect as many as you can protect, so that in the course of non-protection, you don't kill those that will actually provide the jobs. And this process also, finally for me, this issue of deception, they are a product of a tripartite conversation. The unions were there, the employers were there, the government were there. There were subcommittees that looked at each of the 5 parameters of the law. That's the figure itself, the exceptions, the duration, the enforcement, and one other section, about 5 parameters in the law. There are subcommittees that comprises each of the stakeholders that looked at each of those sectors, and then they arrive at what we currently have. So what was agreed, what was presented to the president for his approval. So it was a product of consensus, and we just have to take a critical look at that. Enforcement for us is a.
So I'll give you the chance to respond because I see.
Yeah. So enforcement for us is given. Everybody must enforce, even while we can't, NECA cannot sanction, but we have gone to the extent of sounding out those that can sanction. Not to go and sanction, but to go and investigate. If we add that, if an employee, somebody said the employer is not paying and we are aware, we inform, if it's issue of PENCOM pensions, we inform PENCOM enforcement unit. Just go and investigate if actually what we heard that this employer is doing is true or not. If it's NSITM, we ask them, just go and investigate to be sure that these businesses are complying. And to us as employers, I think that is quite noble, and that's quite commendable.
Okay, thank you very much. But I'll also add, just as a follow-up question to you, that even though you cannot sanction what you do investigate, I'm assuming that part of what you'll be doing also is a lot of education, so that with employers don't get to the point where people have to sort of now begin to whistleblow on their unethical practices, or they don't even start to have unethical practices in the first place, because there's a lot of education on the best practice for dealing with employees. So I'm hoping that that's what NECA does too.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of one of the reasons even why it's not very convenient. I'm actually in the ILO governing body meeting now. One of the reasons we joined is part of the education. We've had over 5, 6, 7 different knowledge sharing sessions concerning the issue of minimum wage for everybody to be aware. Now, if you are not aware, they say there's ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So the idea is everybody must just look for any opportunity to get educated in this concept, even the employees, because it's the employee, it's going overboard for employers to start say, I'm now reporting our members. It's the employees that should actually take the charge and say, look, this business is not paying us what we should be paid. Then let's go and report to the necessary to the authorities that should take it up. And everything boils down to education, as Topper said. If the workers are not educated, if they have been paid 25,000, they are co-conspirators in this whole breaking of the law. They are co-conspirators. If they are paying you 35,000, 40,000, you are not reporting, you are co-conspirator. You can't even go, you collect it for 2, 3 months. You are also guilty of the same offense that you are reporting the employers. So those are the critical issues, and they're quite pragmatic enough that every stakeholder must just understand his responsibilities and try to live up to those responsibilities.
Thanks very much. Joy, did you want to say something before I come to you with a question?
Yes, please. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Wale. You know, I like your line of thought, and I like especially what you said about we are looking at the collective, and that fintech is just an exception to the general collective in terms of people below the number. Now, this is the thing that I said, and I want us to put it in context. There was no figure given as to what the annual turnover should be. Because I know bakery, you talk about small businesses. Now, I think there's an assumption that there are some small businesses that don't make a lot of money. I can tell you for a fact that I have clients that are considered small businesses, and yet their turnover in a year is about 100 million. These particular businesses have staff members of 15 people. They're not in fintech. In fact, they're natural medicine. Natural medicine is a field that where the company is well positioned, harvests money. Now, I'm going back again. In terms of looking at the collective of everyone now, the turnover doesn't have to be as high as what CTI sets, which is 25 million. I'm quite aware. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I run a business. So trust me, I feel the pinch and the pain like everybody else. Do you understand? And I will consider myself also, and as an SME, I will consider myself so. So I'm not talking abstractly. I'm talking real terms because I am an SME. I'll consider myself as such. The firm that I run will be considered as such. So I didn't put a figure. Now, the figure can be debatable and say, okay, well, we should do 5 million, we should do 1 million, we should do 10 million. It doesn't have to be like CTI that is 25 million. We don't have to do a 25 million turnover. But it should be based on turnover. But talking about fintech, which is an exception. But fintech, this industry, I mean, my God, this industry is strong. That industry is strong. And fintech, I just give you another industry that rakes in a lot of money. Natural medicine. that rakes in a lot of money. And there are several other industries like that where the businesses are considered SMEs that rake in money. So in response to what you're saying, sir, I 100% agree with you that there are so many things that entrepreneurs have to carry. But I'm saying that when we are setting the exemptions, I'm not talking about the figure now. I'm talking about the exemptions itself. It should not be based on employees. For it to cut across board, and like esteemed Mr. Benson did say, there's no law that is perfect. So even if we put across board 5 million, some people will still come out and say, no, it is not fair. That is a fact. There's no perfect law anywhere, you know. But I'm thinking that to raise the bar of equity and fairness, there should be on turnover. Now, the amount of turnover can be decided or agreed by the members of the tripartite committee, or, you know, of course, the stakeholders represented by these committee members. Thank you, sir.
Well, maybe turnover is not, while I agree substantially, maybe turnover is not the word. Maybe profit after tax should be a consideration, because a business can make 1 billion naira turnover, and then by the time you take out all the except I'm mixing up the concept, you take out the operating costs, take out every other thing, the 1 billion turnover that we are seeing in the books is nowhere to be seen within the context of the profit. So maybe profit after tax might be a good way to look at it. And lastly,
okay, I like that. I like that thought. Yes.
Sorry, Madam Yvonne. Maybe another way to look at it is, and this is on record, you know, this is quite on record. We also proposed at the committee level, at the during the National Memory Committee, we proposed the exception should be figure and number of employees and turnover. In fact, the context of profit after tax, it didn't come up to my mind then. We proposed, let it be figure and let it be turnover. And the turnover was knocked off. You know, the employers proposed that. We proposed the issue of let it be two context of the number of employees and also the context of the turnover. So that if you escape from the employee perspective, number of employee, at least you still be captured in the context of what the turnover. But that suggestion was knocked off by other committees. So it's I said it's never a perfect law, and there is options and opportunities for review in subsequent years.
Absolutely. There's an opportunity to review. I mean, you've got this point. I mean, you talked about that from what Mr. Wali said, in terms of the multiple taxation, you know, regulatory contradictions, high interest rates, you know, and that being said, and then of course, the fact that 76% of employees right now are actually being employed within this SME space. But having said that, also, what Joy is saying is that she's not concerned about the definition of SMEs from the perspective of she's more concerned about the fact that SME is defined from the number of employees that you have rather than, you know, the turnover. But you say you prefer to use the word profit after tax, which is, you know, I suppose a better terminology to use rather than just the turnover. But either way, what this tells us is that there's an opportunity for this law to be reviewed, or the definition of SME to be redefined. And there's an opportunity perhaps in the next 3 years when the minimum wage is up for review again, then all of these issues can come into play. Those that were not considered before will now be considered and taken on board to ensure that these contradictions are dealt with. And having said that, there was a strong word that Mr. Awele used when he said the employees could be co-conspirators. So if you're being paid below the minimum wage and you accept it, then you're a co-conspirator. But it brings me the fact that workers are facing job security. And of course, with this low minimum wage that they have, it means that they also have very limited bargaining power. So Joy, so then I will say to you that, how therefore can employers support their workers? Yeah. How can employers then support their workers and employees to navigate all these challenges that they have in adhering to a legal minimum wage requirement or paying their workers a minimum wage?
Thank you so much. So you see, the reality is that, I mean, fuel is over 1,000 naira per liter. Trust me, it's, and
Don't remind us.
sorry,
That's another webinar.
So it has greatly impacted the standard of living of everyone. It has greatly impacted businesses. And we should also remember that as much as we are looking out for the welfare of employees, the business make profits. For the business to be able to improve or supplement or support the employees, they must make profits. So there's also the part of the company being able to balance out its responsibilities as to itself and also to his employees. So it's not enough to just say, we do this, we do that. But can the company support whatever initiative that it's bringing on board? But I would, in answering your question, I would create, I think, I'll make some recommendations that companies can do, which I will actually recommend to my clients, and they're already doing that. I know a lot of companies have actually started doing that. First of all, transportation allowance. You can actually provide a transportation system structure to help support your employees who are currently undergoing a lot of a hardship in payments in terms of high fuel. I mean, look at, before I would probably fill my tank with 50,000 naira. And in fact, I'll be flexing for like 2 weeks. I'm not a high movement person anyway, but let's say 2 weeks. But now, with my very little movement, 50,000 is just for 3 or 4 days. That's the reality I'm in right now. So, and that is me. So I'm thinking of my workers. How do I support this high? I mean, there was a time a staff came to me and said, "Ma, please, from paying her current, how much she pays on transportation is about 30,000. From when she used to spend about 10,000 a month, it has tripled to about 30, 40,000 a month. So what did I have to do? I had to visit my books. What structure can I put to support transportation? Do I give them half of their salaries in terms of to support transportation? Meaning that instead of maybe the person earns 150,000, do I now say, okay, I'm putting an additional 30% increase? My point is that there's a transportation system. Do I get a staff bus? Is that reasonable? Because people are coming from different parts of Lagos. My point is that provide some form of transportation support. That's a way businesses can, support their staff. Another way, and which I would fully recommend, is a hybrid or fully remote workspace. I practice that. I feel that in where you cannot probably support, I know that not all functions can be done fully remote, but we could, where the functions that can be done remotely can be given a remote structure, work structure. Now, I know employers are a bit advanced, scared about this, but in my own personal space, I have found it quite easy. I think the reason why a lot of employers have struggled with remote work is that they don't have the right structure in place, have the right administrative. There's a structure for remote work that is not the same as on-site. So once you have a strong administrative structure for the remote workspace, in fact, people that work remotely, we tell you they work harder than those who work on sites. And perhaps I've experienced it. I seem to be up all through compared to my colleagues who close at 6 o'clock and they're done. Do you understand? So it's once you have that right administrative structure, you are able to manage the remote or hybrid structure that you could put in place in your organization. Then lunch. Food is expensive. A bag of rice is over 100,000 now. So you can imagine where you have a workplace where you can provide lunch, or even if it's not daily, you could do it like twice a week, thrice a week. I remember I worked in a law firm when I was much younger, when I was a new week, and we're giving lunch. If you know what that did for us as new weeks, It was like a miracle. That was the place to work. We had lunch every day, full lunch. That was like, I was saving like 2,000 off my salary every day from lunch. So these are ways in which the law firm supported the new weeks. Those of us that were, our money was also plenty, but this was a way that could help us, And then you could also have payment of salaries without delay. I mean, yes, I do know that companies undergo through there are times where let it be few in between. If salaries are, I have a salary policy that ensures that staff members are paid salary as at when due. Because right now the economy is not smiling. It really is not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. Some of the things you just mentioned, I can identify with because we certainly do offer staff lunch here at the office, and we have remote working as well. So we have some days that we're working remotely and other days that we're in the office. So we have a hybrid structure that works for us. So that helps support some of the things that you were talking about. Now, I'd like to come back to Mr. Benson, an NLC representative. I don't know if he's here with us. Looks like he's missing again. Okay. So maybe I'll come back. Maybe I'll ask this question to Dr. Temitope instead. So I know we've talked about the fact that, about paying a fair wage and, being ethical and so on. But I want to ask your thoughts around the fact that, do you think that it is for workers within class to receive the same pay? So for example, you have a senior manager in a bank, a senior manager in, I don't know, a law firm, or a senior manager. Do you think that because that's in one job class, they have to have the same pay? Or is it a factor of really the industry and the sector that it is in, the job is in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, absolutely, it is never going to be possible, right, for us to do same pay per grading, right? And I'll give you a very interesting example of, there was a time I had the title of being a manager, right? Salary was 250,000 where I was working, right? And there was also another manager in another organization earning 1 point something million at the time, with official car and everything. So there can't be pay equity from a title point of view, because all organizations are not even aligned on titles. There's some people that I meet and they're like, oh, I'm a vice president in my organization. And, they're earning maybe 200,000. And how do we want to compare that to the vice president in an investment bank who's probably going to be taking, so I think that would definitely not work. Again, it's still going to boil down to, and I think I raised my hand since, there's a lot that still needs to be demystified around this issue of, pay balance, not gender balance, pay alignment and all that. Because from my perspective, listening to everything that's been going on, it's almost as if there is no solution, right? It's almost as if we are heading towards a place where we just need to accept what it is, right?
Yeah.
I still think we need to go back to the drawing board. And this is where a lot of advocacy needs to be done. I like a lot of fantastic things I've heard, because I may not be so familiar with the government and all of that. But there's one question I'm also having. Mr. Smart spoke about a lot of things that happens behind the scene, how they escalate to the authorities that can investigate. But are people aware of these things? Are people even aware that, they can make reports? Who are they meant to make these reports to? So all of these things are not made public. And when I also hear things around, some committees are being set to discuss, what should be the criteria for minimum wage, who are the members of this committee? How are they being selected? Is there a fair representation in the committees that comprises of, employees, employers, regional, sectoral? Again, those are questions that I'm just asking. And I feel like this whole thing requires a lot of advocacy and, back to the word re-education and re-education. I think there's a lot going on that people are not even aware of, and it's important for us to probably drive more advocacy around this. We would never get it straight. Even the Western world, they're still struggling with it. But I think there should be measures in place to at least ensure that, organizations have something to work towards. Employees also have something to hold on to say, okay, if I'm going to be working here, we can also have ranges. So there could be, I'm imagining a situation where whatever the outcome of, the conversations that are going on within the government is, we can say for a Lagos State, right, the education sector in Lagos State, the minimum anyone should earn should be XYZ, right? For the financial services, for this, for that. And I think there's also going to be a bit of struggle around how do we now harmonize minimum wage or arrive at consensus when we still have the public sector and the private sector totally operating differently. That is another area that we've not even scratched, because while we would have private, because I consult for a school, right? And while we would have private school that could afford to pay the minimum wage, right? And we have a public school that cannot afford to pay the minimum wage. We have some private schools that are international. They probably collect their payments in dollars and all of that. But I still believe that regardless of the sector, the industry, if there are policies to say the minimum any school should be paying anyone should be this in a Lagos, the same way they do the FAC and JAC and everything, Lagos will get more, Ekiti will get less, Ondo will get, I still think we need to go deeper into it. And because to be honest, 70K has been announced as minimum wage. And this has happened a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Has anything happened to even check whether organizations are complying?
Yeah.
Is anyone asking questions whether employees are being paid that minimum wage? What is going to happen to those that do not pay the minimum wage? Is the minimum wage even realistic across board? So to be honest, I think there's a lot more that still needs to be done. And even when we're speaking of minimum wage, Ms. Benson mentioned something around fuel is 1,000 and something right now. It's scary, to be honest, because even the minimum wage of 70,000 naira, right? That sounds like 70 liters of fuel.
Yeah.
So it's like giving people 70 liters of fuel, and we still have people who are earning below that. I consult for a lot of smaller companies, and absolutely I agree with you, Ms. Benson. You see those herbal companies, it may sound they were just making all this agbo, all these things they call it. Some of them are raking in millions that they don't even have more than 5 staff that will just mix and go out and, So they're just speaking to the conversation around revenue or profit after tax. I'm also aligned with the profit after tax could be a benchmark for it, because from profit after tax, all the payments and salaries and all operating expense have been factored into it. So I just thought to also chip in that in place.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for that contribution. Thanks. Well, since Mr. Benson is not here with us, I think we've lost him. So I will just probably address the last question, the question I had for him to Mr. Oyerinde, and then hopefully we should be wrap up very soon. Right. I think it's the same question that I posed to Dr. Agbakoba. I'd like to pose to you, Mr. Oyerinde, which whether it's fair also to pay workers of the same class. They need to receive the same salary, the same wage. He's mentioned a number of things that we need to be aware of.
Well,
Mr. Oyerinde?
I align with him. It's unfortunately again for the last 2 hours, 1.5 hours, we've not really discussed about productivity.
Okay, you can talk to us about that.
We expect the employer to pay.
Yes.
To pay what we probably call the show up wage. That's the minimum wage. Just show up. whether you do anything on, just show up and collect 70K. But
Mm-hmm.
we are not focusing on productivity. Because something must give. You know, you don't just show up for showing up sake. And
What
while
document
right
stop?
or
I
wrong
can't
is
tell
quite
that. Copy the
subjective, you know,
stop in what
it's
document or
quite
print out picture.
it's quite subjective. It's quite a subjective context in what is right or what is not, and what is fair or what is not fair. But the whole issue for me is this: for every employer, I think one of the things that should drive wage or that should determine wage is maybe your job evaluation. After your job evaluation, then we start.
Productivity is a key factor to that.
Very, very, very important. You know, you can't take out productivity you can't take it out of the context. But unfortunately, we've also not dwell on productivity within the context of this conversation. And I will sum up my submission with this. If we still don't if we don't advocate rightly, you know, we'll be going on a rigmarole. And when I say advocate rightly, advocate for a productive or a growing economy that is in the right trajectory. If the employee, a million naira let's assume the employer has agreed to pay the 615,000 that labor wants. Where will the cost come from? You know, those costs will be part of the operating cost for the business. And normally, the people that have taken the risk to invest, will naturally want some level of returns. Now, what happens is those costs, those overhead costs, either the cost of salary, cost of wages, cost of production, everything goes back into the actual cost of the goods and services. So what the employee will have gained in naira and copper, it will lose on the shelf. Because you have to go back to the shelf and buy the goods that are now expensive. So it's a rigmarole a never-ending rigmarole. And that's why I say, look, everybody should join the advocacy for a bright government policy, let the economy be
Better
growing.
economy.
So our 1 naira will serve us better than a 10 naira that will be useless to all of us when the economy is not right. So those are the key fundamental issues. Fuel is 1,000 plus now, and it's affecting the employee in the cost of transportation. It's affecting the employer within the cost of logistics, within the cost of the business value chain. So it's both as Yoruba will say, and I've shared this adage many times. It said, "Taro barokun, arole roadre." If the rope is not standing firm, then the bird cannot perch comfortably on it. You know? So enterprise sustainability is very fundamental to the whole context of employee welfare, to the whole context of national development, and everything rests basically on a thriving economy, an economy that is good enough to accommodate, to accept all the shocks that will probably we have. I will emphasize what we preach is responsible enterprises, responsible business conduct by employers. While you have some employers that will by choice or by whatever circumstances will decide to go south, you know, we'll continue to engage, and also hope the organized labor will also do the best to continue to sound out, to bring out those that identify as recalcitrant and as uncooperative employers. So we all can build this ecosystem together.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Yeride. Mr. Benson, I see you're back here with us now. Do you hear me? Well, we are within the time that we set out. We set out about 2 hours to have these interesting conversations. And I can tell you that those have been 2 hours very well spent. Well, we've come up with a number of things and we've learned quite a few things. And some of the things that are resonating across, like a common denominator amongst all of you, the panelists, is the fact that there has to be education. Education and advocacy is very key. The fact that we perhaps need to review the law as it is now. And I mean, we anticipate that when there's a review for the next 3 years, then some of the things that are contradictory or ambiguous or not clear right now will be be discussed and sorted out at that point in time, such as what the definition of an SME is, really. And then we've talked the fact that we need to define the minimum wage based on sectors. Looking at each sector, using the sectors as the parameters, how each sector performs. The indices and the macroeconomic factors around each of those sectors will determine what the minimum wage for each sector should be. So we want to have that sort of sectoral minimum wage. And we've also talked about the fact that perhaps we should also be looking at the profit after tax rather than just turnover. But the point is, rather than use the number of employee as a factor to determine what an SME should be, then we should more be looking at the from the financial perspective of the company, turnover, the profit after tax, or whichever other financial indices we might prefer to use as the basis for determining what a minimum wage is. The Tokwe makes some interesting points around the fact that when we're looking at from the ethical perspective and asking if employers are actually complying, one of the things he said is who is checking? Who really is checking if people are complying or have ethical labor practices? And are people aware of the fact that somebody has to investigate and then escalate the recalcitrant or erring employers to a particular regulatory body? I'm sure people don't know about that, so people need to know, And even with the fact that we're talking about a minimum wage of 70K, we do know that some people still aren't paying. We hear of states that are not paying. And beyond that, we also hear of employers who are owing salaries. So for all of this, do people know how to escalate these issues, so that people can begin to sort of be more compliant with regulation? And a point that Mr. Yoide made, it's a toss-up between, if I can't afford to pay, then maybe I should downsize so that, with the number that I have, it's more manageable. Because, it's better than have a huge workforce and you're not able to pay the entire workforce. Then come up with a manageable size. And then at least you have the right, your right size, and then you're able to afford the people that you have as on your salary scale sheet. So a number of things have been mentioned. And then, of course, it's about, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a better economy. So while we're talking about the fact that the employers need to pay a certain amount of money, workers' productivity is key too, because if you're not productive, then the business cannot be profitable. And if the business is not profitable, then it can't afford to pay wages or even increase wages. So employee profitability is also very key. It's key to the sustainability of the employer, the business, and to the payment of a minimum wage. At the end of the day, what we want is employers to exhibit a reasonable business conduct, to have ethical practices in the way they run the business and in the way they manage and deal with their employers and employees. A number of things have been mentioned to be able to take care of some of the hardships that employers are facing now, employees are facing. Transport allowance, if you can afford to have a staff bus for your employees, that would be great. We know that the cost, it has to be foiled anyway, and rising cost of petrol, but that will come a long way towards helping your employees. You can introduce hybrid remote working structure, have a strong administrative structure to manage your remote working system, and that may go a long way towards solving some of the issues that employees face with the minimum wage, or even with the hard cost of living. And then, of course, if you can provide lunch for employees, that will go a long way also. So to my esteemed panelists, I want to say a very big thank you for the insights that you have shared with us, for the time you have spent with us. So don't go yet, because there are a few questions coming through, which I would ask each one of you. So to wrap up, I just want to ask your thoughts around one question, the same question to everyone, and just get everyone's perspective on that. So my last question to everybody is, a second, I'll ask your recommendations in terms of what you would prefer to organizations in Nigeria towards implementing best practices and compliance with minimum wage. So I'll start with Dr. Temitope. Have I lost him? Okay, Joy, I'll go to you now, Joy, if you can.
Okay, so in just a
In
minute, I
terms
just
of
want to bring,
recommendations, your thoughts around.
yes, in terms of recommendation, then I'll just quickly address something that Dr. Temitope mentioned, which is who is checking. Now, the law the Act did provide in Section 12 of provided for monitoring and compliance. So I want to just put it out there that there's actually a provision. Whether that provision is adequate, now that's a different conversation. But the law did, the Act, the Minimum Wage Act 2019 did provide for monitoring and compliance and random inspections by authorized officers from the Ministry of Labor to organizations and all of that. Now, back to the question, my final thought as to compliance. Now, Mr. Wale did mention something very striking, which is we need to tie performance to compensation. Because you see, if business is not profitable, how can they pay? But at the same time, I'm also thinking about the fact that compensation on the minimum wage is, I mean, the stock market put it so something, 70 liters is minimum wage. That's what they're saying. So, or 70 liters is minimum wage. So, for me, that is sufficient to just show up. So, am I advocating non-performance? Of course not. I'm not advocating non-performance. You should do your work because that's why you were engaged in the first place. We're giving a KPI and all of that. I mean, why am I paying minimum wage if you're not going to do your work? That will produce the money that will pay you the salary. Do you get my point? It's a circle. So in complying, I would say that companies should also review their existing wage structures for their employees, putting all of this factor into play, tying compensation to performance, coming up with structures that can support and help employees perform, because it's not just about telling employees to do the job. Performance management is a different ball game.
Absolutely.
It's not even a conversation that on its own is a conversation, and a lot of employers are failing in performance management. So it's not about holding the employee responsible. What about the employer's duty in ensuring in effective performance management? So that, like I said, is a different conversation. Then I would also say that we should document and keep records of wage increases and adjustment. Then companies should have clear policies in your employee handbook or whatever as regards wage payment, wage structure, the employment contract itself. We found out a lot of some organizations have found themselves are foul of employment contracts. I mean, someone is working for you without an employment contract. And according to the Labor Act, within 3 months of engaging a worker or an employee, you must give them an employment letter. A contract, an employment contract. And we have employers who do not even know what they are paid. I remember there's a particular company I consulted for, and they told me to do an audit of the staff. And I asked the staff, okay, so when did you what's the employment letter? He said that he didn't know that. In fact, he didn't know how much was going to be paid at the end of the month until he saw the salary. I found that was quite strange. I said, I don't understand. When you want somebody that he took up this work without knowing what to be paid she said yes, he just discussed a range. But you see, that's the desperation of people, because people are hungry. They just want to work. Do you understand? So he took up the employment, not knowing how much is being paid. And at the end of the month, he's being paid 100,000. And right now, he's stuck in this job of 100K. Why he's actually looking for another job? But there are no jobs really out there. Do you understand? But that is a violation of the Labor Act. And that particular staff now, you call the person, if probably the person was earning less than 7, say he's a co-conspirator in such a situation. But the person really, well, maybe there's an argument because of people feel helpless to the system. So even if you report like Dr. said, who are you reporting to exactly? Is it the Ministry of Labor? Can I just walk into the Ministry of Labor and just say, I want to see, who am I asking to see? Who am I making this complaint to? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wale, you're in there. Can I get your thoughts around the same question, which is what recommendations
most times, most of these sessions always end like the employer is being on trial. But I also try and play and just wrap this up this way. Now, first, it's a difficult conversation that I've made up my mind that I'm not going to shy away from consistently. Now,
yeah.
it's a minimum wage, You know, I'm not
Yes.
expecting, you know, hardly will you find anywhere there's somebody on minimum wage, you know, not a professional, a minimum wage, the most vulnerable worker. Hardly will you find a most vulnerable worker riding a car, you know, anywhere probably in the world. A most vulnerable, those that are less of protection. So the argument of 70 liters is 70 naira. It's really doesn't apply to the person any minimum wage. The argument of the NLC of one bag of rice, a man with 4 children. Hardly will you find somebody on minimum wage having 4 children and 2 wives. Minimum wage. We're not talking about salary now, so that we don't mix it up. Minimum wage, the wage for the most vulnerable person. Now, it's the concept of responsibility, now personal responsibility, because the argument that we are championing will probably not end if, for whatever reason at all, economic reasons, I give up my right because of my current economic circumstances. So an employer stamples on my right. Then, because of my current economic circumstances, I refuse to report. Now, I am contributing to weakening the institutions that have been created to manage this process. Whether the Ministry of Labor is working or not, my responsibility is, look, if you go to the Ministry of Labor, there are labor officers, we can respond. I can respond, I can report anonymously.
Yes.
So we don't believe that those institutions are dead on arrival. If we don't strengthen those institutions that are meant to enforce, then we are all conspiring to create the same problem that we have. So an average employee must, you know, it will surprise you that even pension contributions, most employees, they don't check, they don't see the alert of contribution every month, and they don't report. So it's a joint responsibility. The employee, irrespective of your circumstance, if you don't report, you are strengthening the hand of that unscrupulous employer to continue to do what he has been doing. So it's a joint responsibility. The employee cannot abdicate his personal responsibility for himself or for his, if he can't deal with it, let him go to the NLC or TUC and then go and report and then let them deal with it. And lastly, employer's duty. I am proud to say this on behalf of most Nigerian employers, most responsible Nigerian employers, that even before the president, even the first time the fuel subsidy was removed, most employers adjusted salaries. Most came up with different schemes. Those that are doing 2 or 3 days working from home, those that are doing product sharing, employers responded to deal with this issue. So this generalization of most employers, we want names. If employer A is not doing it, look, I can deal with it anonymously. I can report anonymously. I'm not reporting. I'm just drawing the attention of the authorities to it. I'm not reporting the employer. I'm not passing it in bad, but I'm just drawing the attention of the authorities. This might be happening here. So let's go and check it out. But employers have risen to the challenge of operating in this environment. It is not easy to operate in this environment. It takes guts and resilience to keep staying in this environment. There's a business that we are currently dealing with their issue with some of those regulators. They came in, there are 5 group of companies, 5 in the group. As of today, there are only 2. 3 of those groups they've shut down because the environment doesn't just allow them to survive. So what are we talking about? So for us, it's an issue that we have to look at dispassionately. What are the responsibilities of the employers? What are the hindrances for the employers fulfilling those responsibilities? Then once those hindrances are not significantly addressed, but minimally addressed, then why is the employer now abdicating those responsibilities? Then we start dealing with those employers. Everybody must obey the law. Everybody must operate within the law. And then the environment also must be conducive for everybody to be able to live within the context of those laws. Those are our positions, and I think those are noble enough.
All right, thanks very much. Dr. Temitope, I can see you're on here. Can you sort of give us your final thoughts around the recommendations you would offer to organizations in Nigeria regarding implementation of best practices for compliance with employment law and minimum wage.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I had to quickly attend to something.
That's fine.
But yeah, I think a lot has been said today. I totally align with, what all the other speakers have said. In terms of recommendation, I would say there needs to be really, really strong advocacy and sensitization in terms of the labor laws, right? Because I think a lot of both employers and employees do not even understand their rights and responsibilities as stipulated by the Nigerian labor laws. So it would be good to encourage employers to go back to the labor laws and better understand their rights and responsibilities, even beyond minimum wage, right? How they treat employees, their policies around when you're terminating, even payments around termination, minimum notice, and all of those things. They are also part of wages that are very important. I would also say, and this is more like a plea to the government and the representative of government here, right? It is one thing to have policies. It is one thing to make all the plans and all of that, but please, who is being carried along and how is information being disseminated to the grassroots? Because I think that is a missing piece that we are not talking about. I, for one, as a consultant, consulting for so many small businesses, a lot of them are not aware of this information. I have to start using my knowledge to be educating and re-educating them. And of course, I'm only restricted to the people I have access to. So it's very important to create that channel. And I wish Mr. Benson was also still on this call as the head of public affairs of NLC. I think NLC has a lot of work to do in communicating. I don't think the communication is effective enough. And also, we need to talk about compliance, right? Compliance compliance is one thing, right? But again, what happens for those that are not complying? It's also very important because Nigeria right now feels like people feel they can get away with anything. People feel if I know someone somewhere, even if my employee reports me, I can get away with everything. So again, those are the bigger issues. Even beyond talking about affordability and all of that. I like the sound of downsizing. It sounds very difficult to the ears. It sounds very unpleasant, but it's a business decision, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a business decision that needs to be made. So overall, I would conclude by saying one of the things that Mr. Wale and Ms. Benson has said as well is employees just needs to go back to the drawing board and understand their rights, right? And also understand that, there needs to be that fairness in our relationships with each other. And the bulk of this, again, I'll push it back, the government and the representative of labor needs to really help to protect employers and employees with policies and compliance. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my dear panelists. Thank you very much for all your contributions. Before I let you go, there are a few questions coming through. So I want to throw some of those questions to you so that you can provide some answers and perspectives to our audience. So so don't go yet. So I'll start with, I have a question for you, Mr. Wale. So there's a question came through saying that, could you provide instances of where NECA has exercised its cohesive powers over non-compliant members? And what corrective measures has NECA implemented to better vet and engage its members?
Thank you.
That's one question. And then there's a second question. Before you answer that, just also tell you that there's another question, but you can answer that later, which is very simple, which is that if an employer is not registered with NECA, can you still engage that person if, for example, they are erring in something? So that's
okay. The penultimate question is what do we do to engage, to share? I think we on a monthly basis we run knowledge sharing sessions
Okay.
We have done 2 sessions on this national minimum wage. We'll
Mhm.
be running a session on advertising council of Nigeria and the role of the private sector in online advertising. So we run knowledge sharing sessions online free every month for all employers, whether you are a NECA member or not, to share information. Now, it's one thing for you to run knowledge sharing sessions. It will also surprise you. I'm not surprised that this kind of very fundamental conversation, we have only just about 105 guests, even when this is well circulated. You ask me, the HR will say he's busy, he can't join this kind of conversation. Then later, you go back and say he's not aware that certain things happen. So it also shows the level of the disposition of individuals to knowledge, which anybody can, but that we do to correct actions. Now, we cannot sanction. We don't have the power to sanction, but we have on our members, even non-members, we have the power to exercise some level of corrective action through our partnership with those agencies. We have partnership with Telecom, with NSITF, ITF, with FRS, with Advertising Council of Nigeria. Now, look, if employers are not doing this, then you have the right to exercise your regulatory powers. But before you exercise those regulatory powers, let's create a platform for understanding what exactly you want to regulate. Because sometimes you have regulators that the businesses don't even understand what are the infractions. So just like the Akon loan I mentioned, that now if you advertise on Facebook, you advertise on Instagram, you advertise on LinkedIn, your company product, Akon say you are liable. You are liable to pay certain amounts. So most businesses are not aware. So what we do is create a platform for those engagements so that businesses can consistently be in a good compliance level. Now it's now the responsibility of those businesses to leverage on those knowledge sharing sessions to upscale their compliance levels. Now, do we engage non-NECA members? We engage non-NECA members on non-consulting services. If a NECA member has issues with any regulator that we feel those issues are are, uh, are tending towards victimization, towards exploitation, or towards any form of harassment of that business, then we engage our members definitively. We engage those agencies definitively on behalf of those organizations. Whether at the National Assembly, at the State Assembly, we engage our members on that. But we can't do that for non-members. If you are not a member, if the business is not a member of NECA, we can't do that definitively for them. The company have to be a member before we can render those definitive services. But generally, knowledge sharing sessions are free sessions, just to also help to improve the regulatory environment so that nobody is caught unawares with any regulation. I hope I've answered the questions.
Yes. Okay. So this question, I'll just take one more question and then we can wrap up. And any other questions we will put on our website so that people can go there and either watch this video all over again and see some of the answers that we had there. But somebody said, we talked about the whistleblowing, and there was a question that was asked, will implementing the whistleblowing not just put the employee at risk? Temitope can answer this, and also Mr. Yeride, after Temitope gives his view. They're saying that would it not put an employee at risk?
Yeah.
We talked about the fact that employees even need to know their own rights as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that was why I dimensioned it when I was speaking to it, right? Because definitely whistleblowing would always, put the whistleblower at risk. And that's why I also, pleaded with the authorities, right, to say there should also be, something to protect the whistleblower. And that's what I'm saying. While we're encouraging psychological safety, there should be, measures in place to also avoid retaliation. And to be honest, if we look at other areas within our system in the country, I think the whistleblowing policy is still very weak. We've had whistleblowers who are also being arrested, right? So I think it's important for us to ensure that whistleblowing has to be something that the mechanism must be in a way that the whistleblowers' details, information is never going to go out there. If as much as possible. And personally, I would always encourage people, even if you want to whistleblow and you know the right place to, blow the whistle, to open an anonymous email. Don't use your phone number, because you also need to protect yourself while waiting to be protected. So I think the most important thing is letting employers and employees know that there's a platform where people would whistleblow, right? That would probably put some employers on their toes because they don't want to be called out. And that would also give employees reassurance that, I can speak up. But for the employees, I would encourage you that while we are, still hopeful and trusting that, you will be protected, also protect yourself. Open an anonymous email. Do not use your own personal phone number so it cannot be traced back to you directly. And if you want to summon the courage and the boldness as well to, go out there, get your facts right. Because there are people who also tell lies about their employer. So get your facts right, have all the evidences, make sure they are backed up by the labor law, and you can go all out and whistleblow.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Yerinde, your thoughts, your final thoughts on that?
My response to, this whistleblowing thing is a dangerous double-edged sword. Now, if a petition gets to the police, it doesn't have to be true. The police will naturally want to investigate. Then it causes a lot of distress for the employer. And then it was discovered that the petition is false. Then what happens to the whistleblower? There should be consequences for the whistleblower. So if he uses an anonymous email, an anonymous phone number, then there's no way to track somebody that just willfully want to victimize the business. So it's a double-edged sword. Now, in the provisions of the law, and the NIC, National Industrial Court, have affirmed this consistently. An employee can claim constructive dismissal. I can claim Ms. Benson has left. No, there's constructive dismissal. There is there are one or two different kind of dismissals that are vindictive, that the employer cannot really carry out if so for me those are provisions that an average employee can leverage on. If I'm victimized by reason of what I say that is true, then we all go back to we all go and sort it out in the course. And I really think without putting NSC on the spot, I think NSC have a lot to do, as Papa has said it, or basically a lot to do in the context of education and protection of their members. Nobody will do it. The ones that the employer is doing, the ones that we are doing to protect employees in the context of sharing information, escalating issues to the authorities to check out employers. I think it's just from the perspective of responsible business conduct. But NSA has a lot to do in educating its members so that they are well protected and they also understand their rights. If you don't know your rights, it's a natural consequences. Some unscrupulous people will try to trample on it, and that's just it's just nature as it were. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Like I said, because we are set on a particular time and we really want to finish within that time. So any other further questions that are coming through, we shall send to you individually to provide answers, and we'll post that onto our website so that everybody can see the responses. So at this point, I actually want to sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank Dr. Timitokwe, Mr. Yerinde, Joy, who has left, and Mr. Benson. Unfortunately, it wasn't as smooth sailing for us as we would like in our engagement with him due to technological issues he was having with his devices. But nevertheless, the little contributions he made was very insightful and welcoming. So I want to thank you very much for responding to us, our invitation to be part of this webinar. We are extremely grateful, and we hope that our listeners have actually learned a lot. And obviously from the questions that have come through, we know that clearly you've been very engaging and you have shared your expertise and knowledge with us. I'll hand you over to Mary Cynthia, Corporate Commercial Council, to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. My name is Cynthia Otundare. I'm with the Agbakoba Legal Corporate Commercial Package, which is the team that has organized this webinar. As we wrap up, I'm filled with gratitude to God and for the meaningful contributions that have made this webinar a success. On behalf of Olisa Agbakoba Legal Corporate Commercial Group, I want to say a big thank you to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Temitope Richard Banji, Mrs. Joy Benson, Mr. Wale Smart Oyerinde, Mr. Benson Upa. Your distinct expertise and contributions and recommendations enriched our discussions and for sure made a lasting impact on all participants here. Thank you so much for your time. I also want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the corporate commercial team members who worked tirelessly to make this webinar a success, namely Sheun Akinade, Esther Ogweze, Nkechinire Odunze, Success Alabi, Tola Miche Adewale, Gracie Keji, and our practice head and moderator for the day, Mrs. Yvonne Ezekiel. I also want to say thank you to the IT team for their crucial role in making this event run smoothly. Finally, to all participants, thank you for joining us and for your engagement. We do not take your presence and contributions for granted, and we look forward to more partnership and collaborative opportunities in the future on employment law and other areas of interest. Thank you very much.